Stop scrolling. This isn't nostalgia. This isn't a pity crown. And this definitely isn't one of those remember when stories. This is 2025. The K-pop industry is louder than ever. Comebacks drop every week, rookie groups sprint for relevance, charts move at algorithm speed. And right in the middle of that chaos, BTS sits at #1 in the Gallup Korea survey. No group comeback, no title track, no synchronized choreo shaking music shows, just silence and domination. That's the part that messes with your head, because logically, this shouldn't happen. K-pop is supposed to reward activity, visibility, noise, but 2025 quietly proves something uncomfortable for the industry. Some names don't need to shout anymore. BTS isn't competing on the same track, they're hovering above it, untouchable, living in public consciousness like a default setting. People didn't vote because of a song they heard yesterday, they voted because BTS feels permanent, familiar, embedded, like a landmark you don't visit every day, but instinctively point to when asked, what defines this place? This story isn't about absence, it's about how presence can survive without constant proof. And once you really sit with that idea, the countdown ahead stops feeling like a ranking and starts feeling like a case study in cultural gravity. Number 7. Kim Sok-jin, the absence that speaks. When people talk about presence, they usually mean someone loud, visible, constantly popping up on screens. But Kim Sok-jin flips that definition on its head in 2025. Jin's power this year isn't in how often he appears, but in how naturally he remains part of the conversation even when he's not actively promoting anything. In a K-pop ecosystem obsessed with speed, output, and constant exposure, Jin represents something strangely rare: emotional permanence. His image is already engraved into the public's memory as the dependable eldest, the mood maker who disarms pressure with humor, the member who never pretended to be anything other than sincere. And that sincerity doesn't expire just because the group isn't releasing a new song. When Gallup respondents think about BTS, Jin exists in that mental snapshot like background music you don't consciously notice until it's gone, and then you realize the silence feels wrong. His past solo work, variety presence, and public persona built a trust loop with audiences. Jin feels safe, familiar, human. In 2025, while newer idols are still introducing themselves, Jin doesn't need reintroduction. People already know how he laughs, how he speaks, how he breaks tension with one well-timed dad joke. That's cultural memory doing unpaid overtime. His absence doesn't weaken BTS's standing, it reinforces it, because it proves the group's identity isn't fragile or dependent on constant reinforcement. Jin's role in this ranking isn't flashy, but it's foundational. He's the proof that BTS has crossed the line from trending act to cultural fixture, and honestly, that's a flex no comeback teaser can buy. Number 6. Min Yoongi, the quiet authority. There's a certain kind of power that doesn't need to announce itself, and in 2025, Min Yoongi operates entirely in that lane. While the industry runs on hype cycles and visibility metrics, Yoongi's influence works more like gravity, steady, invisible, and impossible to ignore once you're within range. Even without a BTS comeback this year, his name still carries weight because people associate him with substance, craft, honesty. The guy who talks about burnout before it's trendy, about ambition without glamorizing exhaustion, about success while questioning its cost. That reputation didn't disappear just because the group went quiet. In fact, silence makes it louder. When Gallup respondents choose BTS in 2025, they're not voting for a catchy chorus, they're voting for credibility. Yoongi's long-standing role as a producer, lyricist, and unfiltered voice built a perception of BTS as artists first, idols second. And that matters deeply in Korea, where longevity often depends on respect, not just popularity. Yoongi symbolizes the adult phase of BTS, the moment when the group stopped chasing validation and started defining their own standards. His authority isn't flashy, it's earned, and that's why it lasts. You don't need to see him everywhere to feel his presence, you just need to know he exists. And in a year full of noise, that kind of quiet confidence feels almost radical. Number 5. J-Hope. Energy that never logs out. If BTS were a system running in the background of pop culture, then Jungkook would be the process that never stops, never crashes, and somehow keeps everything responsive even when the main program isn't visibly open. In 2025, with no group comeback to refresh the public's attention, Hoseok's role becomes weirdly crucial because he represents continuity through energy. Not the loud, chaotic kind, but the disciplined, intentional kind that feels like momentum stored in a battery rather than burned in a flash. People don't just remember J-Hope as the bright one, they remember him as the embodiment of effort, rehearsal, and respect for the stage. That association lingers long after the last performance ends. When Gallup respondents think of BTS, they remember precision that still feels joyful, smiles that don't look forced, performances that feel alive rather than manufactured. That's Hoseok's imprint. He's the reason BTS is still mentally linked with professional excellence instead of legacy act. Even in silence, his image keeps the group from feeling static or frozen in the past. There's also something deeply reassuring about J-Hope's consistency. He never breaks character because the character is just him. In a year when trends move faster than attention spans, that reliability becomes its own kind of hype. No comeback needed. The energy is already logged in, quietly running, making sure BTS still feels active even when they technically aren't. Number 4. Kim Namjoon, the intellectual backbone. In 2025, when people try to explain why BTS can still top a national survey without releasing a single group track, the conversation almost always circles back to one name, Kim Namjoon. Not because he's the loudest or the most visible, but because he's the structural beam holding the entire narrative together. Namjoon turned BTS into more than performers a long time ago. He gave them language. Words for pressure, growth, doubt, responsibility, and identity, spoken clearly enough that millions felt personally addressed. That doesn't disappear when promotions stop. If anything, it matures. In 2025, BTS is no longer measured only by output, but by meaning, and Namjoon is the reason that meaning feels intentional rather than accidental. His interviews, speeches, and lyrics over the years built a reputation of BTS as thoughtful, articulate, and culturally aware, traits that resonate deeply in Korea, where public figures are often expected to represent more than just entertainment. Gallup voters aren't reacting to a viral moment, they're responding to an accumulated trust that BTS stands for something coherent. Namjoon's presence ensures the group never feels hollow or manufactured, even in silence. He is the intellectual backbone that keeps BTS upright when the noise fades, the member who makes the group feel like a conversation that never really ends, just pauses, reflects, and then continues with more depth. Number 3. Park Jimin. Emotional precision. There's a reason BTS is still described with words like moving, sincere, and felt, even in a year with no group comeback, and that reason is deeply tied to Park Jimin. Jimin's influence has never been about volume or dominance, it's about accuracy. He doesn't just express emotion, he calibrates it. Every gesture, vocal inflection, and moment of vulnerability he's shown over the years trained audiences to expect emotional honesty from BTS as a baseline. So in 2025, when people choose BTS in the Gallup Korea survey, they're not reacting to something new, they're remembering how BTS once made them feel, and that memory is incredibly precise. Jimin's artistry lives in the space between strength and fragility, and that balance shaped the group's identity in a way that doesn't fade with time. Even without new stages, people still associate BTS with empathy, softness without weakness, and intensity without aggression. That's Jimin's emotional signature at work. He turns sensitivity into a strength in an industry that often rewards spectacle over sincerity. In a quiet year, that legacy becomes louder. Jimin proves that relevance isn't always about being seen, it's about being remembered accurately. And once an artist reaches that level of emotional precision, silence doesn't erase them, it preserves them. Number 2. Kim Taehyung, cultural magnetism. If relevance were a physical force, Kim Taehyung would be the kind that bends the room without asking permission. In 2025, with BTS not releasing a group comeback, Taehyung's role becomes especially fascinating because he doesn't just maintain attention, he attracts new gravity to the BTS name. His appeal cuts across categories: idol, artist, fashion figure, cultural reference point. People who might not actively follow K-pop still recognize him, still talk about him, still feel curious. And curiosity is powerful. It feeds memory, it feeds relevance, and it feeds surveys like Gallup in ways charts can't measure. Taehyung represents BTS's ability to exist beyond the idol box, to feel timeless rather than trend-bound. His artistic sensibility, slow, moody, unapologetically personal, contrasts sharply with the hyperspeed industry around him, and that contrast makes him stand out even more. In a silent year, that distinctiveness becomes a beacon. When respondents think of BTS, Taehyung often acts as the mental entry point, the familiar face that pulls the rest of the group back into focus. He doesn't need a comeback to remind people BTS is still culturally present. His existence does that automatically. That's magnetism. And in 2025, it's one of the strongest forces keeping BTS firmly at the top. Number 1. Jungkook, the center that holds. At the very top of this countdown, standing quietly but unshakably in the middle of everything, is Jungkook. Not as a replacement for BTS, not as a solo eclipse, but as the living axis that keeps the entire constellation aligned. In 2025, Jungkook doesn't feel like a member who's filling space during a group pause. He feels like the proof that the space was never empty to begin with. His presence reassures the public that BTS isn't fragmented, fading, or drifting into nostalgia territory. Instead, it feels intact, breathing, waiting. Jungkook embodies continuity in its purest form, the bridge between BTS's past intensity and its future potential. People recognize him instantly, trust him instinctively, and associate him with reliability in performance and sincerity in image. That matters more than hype ever could. When Gallup respondents mark BTS as the top K-pop boy group of 2025, many of them are responding to that sense of stability Jungkook represents, the feeling that BTS never lost its center. He carries familiarity without stagnation, growth without abandonment. In a year when the group is silent, Jungkook doesn't shout to fill the gap. He simply stands there, holding the line, reminding everyone what BTS feels like at its core. And that's why this number 1 spot makes perfect sense. Not because BTS was active, but because its center never collapsed. And when the countdown ends, the silence gets louder than the music ever was. That's the real takeaway from 2025. BTS didn't top Gallup Korea because they dominated playlists or flooded screens. They did it because they already live somewhere deeper, inside memory, inside habit, inside the cultural reflex of an entire generation. Each member held a different pillar, and together they proved that relevance isn't rented per comeback, it's owned through time. This wasn't a victory lap, it was a temperature check, and BTS still set the climate. No fireworks, no announcements, no noise. Just 7 names, 1 legacy, and a crown that stayed exactly where everyone subconsciously expected it to be. In a year obsessed with what's next, BTS quietly reminded the industry of something terrifying and beautiful. Some stories don't need to move forward to remain ahead.